Right, turning our attention to home affairs related right now. Now, a lack of security at the Marabastad Refugee Office puts refugees at risk of exploitation and violence. And this according to the Democratic Alliance, after the party says they did an oversight inspection. Now, the issue of immigration has brought much apprehension over the years over a range of related issues, including the number of refugees in the country, their status, questions of safety on the country's borders, amongst others. And last year, the Department of Home Affairs issued a white paper on international migration. And the Department of Home Affairs Acting Director General Thulani Mavuso joins me here in studio. Thanks for coming through.
Thank you.
And from our Durban studios, we joined by the Democratic Alliance's Shadow Minister in this regard, who is Mr. Hanif Hussein. Thanks for your time as well.
You're very welcome. Thank you very much. Good morning to you.
Mr. Hussein, let me start with you. The DA, as you've indicated, you've conducted an oversight visit at the Marabastad Centre. So can you tell us what did you find there?
Well, what we discovered, and firstly let me say that we've been conducting oversight visits of refugee reception offices throughout the country over the years. And one of the things that we found at Marabastad is the very high levels of corruption, especially outside of the Home Affairs offices. People are often intimidated there by criminal elements. They are mugged. And this has been going on for a number of years. In fact, there is a very famous report done by the Lawyers for Human Rights titled Queue Here for Corruption, sometimes in 2015. There's an additional report, I think, done by Corruption Watch. And the Department of Home Affairs has been well aware of all of these problems at the Desmond Tutu reception office, which incidentally, it's an insult to Archbishop Desmond Tutu, given what's going on there. But these problems are not uncommon, and it's not isolated to that specific office as well, although there are massive problems of corruption there. We visited the Durban Refugee Office, and there are massive problems there in terms of inefficiencies. The Cape Town Reception Office also has been a problem. And of course, we hear now that the Port Elizabeth one, thankfully, is going to be reopened. And we have little confidence that there is going to be no corruption or no problems at that office, because I think the entire refugee and asylum system is failing in South Africa.
Mr. Mavuso, you know, not to necessarily co-sign, but I'm going to co-sign what Mr. Hussein has said, because I've received messages from people actually imploring me to try and intervene and help get messages to you as Home Affairs about the situation. People are getting mugged as soon as they step off the taxi or get out of a car before, as Mr. Hussein indicated, they even enter the premises of Home Affairs. So there seems to be a huge problem. And then from the accounts that have been shared with me, when they enter, they again are victimized for a second time, because nobody pays attention to them until they pay. So you must be aware of some of these stories.
Yeah, I know. Good morning, and good morning to the viewers. Indeed, I think maybe let me start here. The refugee regime, or so to say, the asylum seeker project, has actually been abused by people who are not supposed to be on the asylum seeker management regime. The reason why I'm saying that is that this was created to protect people who are either fleeing from their countries for various reasons, who are vulnerable, who are either persecuted in their countries, and so forth. Now, the problems that happen is that, particularly in the region, and obvious beyond the SADC region, there's been obvious a migration to the south, and people abusing, that particular regime just because they cannot get any other form of visa into South Africa, because either there's no visa for people with low skills, for an example. So what then led to that situation is that the system was then clogged by people who are not supposed to be there. So I think this is where we need to start. But the other issue that I want to raise is that the Department of Home Affairs, particularly with Marabastad, we have done a lot in terms of revamping that particular place, introducing what we call an automated system where a person can actually renew their asylum seeker permit without even talking to an official, because obviously we are fully aware that there's been issues of corruption where people were renewing asylum seeker permit in a irregular way. So that we do not deny. That is why we went to introduce that particular mechanism. Look, the volumes are quite huge. In 2008, we received over 202,000 asylum seekers in South Africa, which was quite daunting, because the program was not created for such big volumes. That's why it was then clogged. And then people, when they do not get the desired outcome, they then obviously go for judicial review, or they appeal to the Refugee Appeals Board, which also was constrained by the legislation which we have just amended. I think Honorable Sen is fully aware of that. So now we are currently busy with drafting regulations to make it easier for the Refugee Appeals Board to actually finalize the cases, because people are sitting waiting for the finalization of the appeals that they have lodged. So that's where we have a challenge. I mean, last year we saw a huge decrease from the 202,000 in 2008 last year to about 24,000 new what we call arrivals in terms of those who are seeking protection.
What is the optimal turnaround time for processing such applications, and what is your turnaround time currently?
Well, let me explain. When somebody obviously arrives at the Refugee Reception Office, the Refugee Status Determination Officer look at the matter, they make a decision there and there, or sometimes it takes a period of not more than 3 months. But in those instances when then is rejected, it is when they lodge an appeal. So in some of these appeals actually have been sitting there for a period of not less than 5 years. So that is why then you have cases that are not concluded, because people keep on then renewing because they are waiting for that Refugee Appeals Board. I mean, the Appeals Board is a board that consists of about 5 people currently, and now the law in terms of how it was written at the time is that they could, when they would hear the appeal, they must sit as a quorum. So if there's 5 of you, the quorum will be at about 3 people. So those are the relaxations that we needed to put in law in order for us to be able to make those decisions that they make valid and that they cannot be challenged through a judicial review.
Now, Mr. Hussein, I assume that there was a reason why you went to conduct this oversight visit, and I'm assuming that you also received complaints. What were you told with regard to that process, and how long it actually does take to get processes finalized?
You see, Mr. Mavuso tells us that people are abusing the system. Well, what we found actually is that Home Affairs is abusing the people. The system is abusing the applicants. That's the harsh reality. When you have 3 or 5 officials having to sit and adjudicate 200,000 applications, naturally that's an indication of inefficiencies in Home Affairs. And the department was aware of this for years. They're fully aware of what the demands are. So you would expect that any reasonable government will be able to meet that demand when it comes to the high number of applications. And because there's inefficiencies in the department, people then opt to go the corruption route. So it creates an opportunity for criminal elements to get into the system. And this is now starting to creep in Home Affairs offices all over the country, actually. The long queues in Home Affairs offices, wherever you go, it's created an opportunity for criminal elements to wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning, hold 10 spaces in the queue, and sell those spaces for 200 and 300 rand in each case. So what's starting to happen, you see, is that these incidents of corruption at Marabastad, for example, and many of the other refugee reception offices, is now starting to creep into other Home Affairs offices, simply because of Home Affairs inefficiencies. And what's happening now is that because of this corruption and because of the inefficiencies in Home Affairs, you are finding that applicants are, in fact, hundreds and thousands of applicants are walking around in the country undocumented. My visit to the Durban Refugee Reception Office not too long ago, what I discovered there was that there were a number of people waiting in the queue just to get an application process and to file an application, and they were turned away because their diary was full right up until February next year. So you have a situation where there are thousands of applicants, genuine asylum seekers, in some cases people from Somalia trying to run away from persecution from Al-Shabaab, for example, who come to South Africa, they want to regularize themselves, they go to a Home Affairs refugee reception office, and then they are told that they have to come back only in February. So many of these people are walking around undocumented in the country. So corruption and Home Affairs inefficiencies is having a direct implication on immigration in South Africa and the high levels of undocumented immigrants in the country. And if they want to fix it, they simply have to fix the inefficiency in the department and stop the corruption.
Before I get Mr. Mavuso to respond, do you agree, though, that some people are abusing the loopholes in the system?
I do agree that there is an abuse of the system. And the reason why there is an abuse of the system is because the usual normal legal routes, the department makes it so difficult for people to apply. So if you have a situation where you welcome people to apply, make it as simple as possible, the turnaround times on the application process must be quick, there must be no corruption whatsoever, then people won't abuse the system. But that percentage of people abusing the system obviously does not mean that the department must create systems that's aimed towards people who are abusing the system. Remember, we have signed a declaration with the United Nations on Convention on Refugees. We have a responsibility to treat each and every single asylum seeker applicant with the respect and the dignity that they deserve. Well, if you visit any one of these refugee reception centers, you will discover for yourself that Home Affairs shows scant regard for the respect that asylum seekers should be given in our country.
Mr. Mavuso?
Well, I think Honorable Sen and I, obviously, we talk on a regular basis on these issues, whether we're in the portfolio committee or outside that. He's well aware that one of the issues that we needed to resolve was the legislation, because you cannot do anything outside the legislation, because when you going to review the appeals, not having followed what is provided for in the legislation, some of those appeals, whether you reject or approve, can be set aside in law. That's the first issue. The second issue, that the issue of resources of the Department of Home Affairs, and I keep on saying this in many platforms, and even himself, he knows, even actually last week, Thursday, he was raising the same issue in the portfolio committee, that actually the issue of Home Affairs budget needs to be reviewed. I've been saying Home Affairs gets a budget of 7.9 billion rand. 2.1 of that goes to IEC and political party funding. So you're left with about 5.8 billion rand. And of that 5.8 billion rand, 3.3 billion is the payment of salaries for 10,000 workforce. Then you are left with about 2.5 billion rand to run 411 offices, 5 refugee reception offices, 72 ports of entry, which process over 100,000 people a day. You have one deportation center. You've got a lot of operations that are happening in the country that we need to be able to fund. So adequate funding is one of the factors that prohibit the Department of Home Affairs to carry out its mandate, because, again, if you have 411 offices to service 57 million people, that's a problem. I mean, the post office, with the population that does not, with the clientele that is not the same as Home Affairs, has got over 2,400 outlets. So that's the one issue. The other issue that Honorable Sen is fully aware of, Home Affairs does not have purpose-built facilities. We are working now with the Department of Public Works to say we need to have a purpose-built facility, so that when people, for example, arrive in our offices, we are able to, in the morning, they can queue inside the office, so that you do not have the infiltration that happens outside the office. I will cite an example that he's fully aware of. Commercial Road office in Durban. It's right in the middle of CBD. When people come to the office before it opens, they queue on the pavements of other shops. That's not a purpose-built facility. So we're saying that the Department of Home Affairs deserves to have infrastructure that can be able to absorb people inside the facility, that can even allow people to have adequate parking. Similarly, with the Desmond to Refugee Reception Office in Marabastad, the outside parameters belongs to the municipality and the South African Police Service to look after, because the Department of Home Affairs obviously does not have a jurisdiction to be able to police outside the parameters, but we deal with what is within our environment.
But still, the corruption continues, even from that stage going in to your offices. What are you going to do about that?
Yes. What we then did with that, one, as I said, we installed an automated system where people can renew their asylum seeker permit without interfering or seeing an official. It's when it's not is approved or what I call renewed on the machine, then they have to go back to see an official. But even there, we have installed cameras. We have moved our Chief Director Asylum Seeker Management to go and sit in Marabastad so that he can monitor all those operations. Similarly, we're going to do the same in Durban. Today, the Minister is in Port Elizabeth to open the refugee reception in Port Elizabeth, because obviously we had closed it because our view was that we needed to receive asylum seekers from, for example, in Gauteng, in the northern borders, because this is where actually most of the asylum seekers arrive, not actually through what we call by means of coastal arrival, because we have not seen people arriving in big boats and ships, either in PE or in Cape Town. But even that's a different discussion for another day.
Gentlemen, it has to be a discussion discussion for another day. But thank you so much for engaging with us this morning. Mr. Hanif Hussein joining us from our Durban studio. He is the DA Shadow Minister for Home Affairs, and with us here in our Johannesburg studio, the Acting Director General in the Department of Home Affairs, and that is, of course, Mr. Thulani Mavuso. We're going to get to a break, and after that,